Okay, hello and welcome to Asians Represent. Today we're doing an episode on mixed race representation in fantasy and D&D. You may have noticed that I am not Daniel Kwan. My name is Isa and my pronouns are she, her. I've done some streams with Asians Represent before. You may know me from Critical Read Al Qadim and the recent Language of Clothing episode. I'm a designer for content streamer, and most importantly, the proud owner of Daniel Kwan's favorite Twitter handle, Evil Clever Dog. And I'm very excited to be hosting this panel on mixed race representation. My own background is Spanish, Pakistani, Syrian, Polish, Ashkenazi Jewish, and Moroccan Sephardic Jewish, and even more if you go just a little bit back. And before we get into the meat of the panel, I'm going to let all these amazing panelists who I've got here introduce themselves. I am going to just go through the order in the Zoom call. So first up, we have Jeremy, Pixelgrotto.
Hi, yeah, my name is Jeremy. Those of you familiar with Asians Represent probably saw me on the Asians Read Legend of the Five Rings videos along with Emma. I am also on a couple of the wrap-up videos, and I chimed in most recently to talk about monks in D&D. I do some freelance writing and blogging about both tabletop RPGs and video games. Recently, I've been doing a lot of stuff for D&D Beyond. You might have read my articles on there. And my exact racial breakup is my mother is Taiwanese, and my father is Jewish American. His family kind of from what was previously Yugoslavia and Poland. And technically my mom had to convert to marry my dad. So I guess you would say I'm Jewish and also Taiwanese.
Cool. And next up is Legal Kimchi.
Hey, I'm Legal Kimchi. I am a YouTuber who does video essays on issues in and around the TTRPG space. Recently, I did one on metagaming. Before that, bioessentialism. I've also done it on being mixed race as well. I also stream on Twitch on Tuesdays and Saturday nights at 9:30 Central Time here in the US, where I usually have a guest from the TTRPG community and discuss various issues with them, usually of their choosing, and kind of deep dive into that sort of stuff. So if you like thinking too much about TTRPG topics, come check me out. I'm Legal Kimchi everywhere, youtube.com/Legal Kimchi, twitch.tv/Legal Kimchi, or at Legal Kimchi on Twitter. My own background is my mother is Korean. My father is Puerto Rican, and I have Spanish background as well, like from Spain. So if you go further back, there's probably some other things sprinkled in there, but those are my main ones.
And Sonia.
Hey everybody, I'm Sonia. I go by Sonia Baloney Art across all social media. This is actually my first time being on Asians Represent, so your girl's a little bit nervous. I am a character designer and illustrator, mainly for things in the TTRPG sphere, while I try to break in animation here in Los Angeles. You can find my stuff in Unbreakable Anthology. Let's see. Revolution is out now, and you can find my art in there, as well as Pathways in volumes 2 and 3, which are coming out. I'm the illustrator on a quest RPG adventure called Bon Appetit, which is where you and your adventuring party have to find help a pair of skeleton husbands prepare for their 1,000 year anniversary dinner, which is really, really cute. I'm also on the Uncaged Goddesses art team, which is like the final book in the Uncaged thing. I did the 2022 Baby Bestiary calendar, which is up on Kickstarter, and a bunch of other stuff. If I keep talking, it's just going to go forever. And in terms of my background, I am Filipino, Polynesian, Black, Hakka Chinese, and Ashkenazi Jewish.
Fantastic. And Emma.
I'm Emma. On Twitter, I am a starchiologist. So I am an archaeologist. I work and do my research in northern Japan, and I still say recently wandered into the TTRPG, space and place. And I do some cultural consultation as well as sensitivity reading for Japanese history, culture, and society related things. I also teach about East Asian pop culture and representation in Western pop culture. And yeah, no big surprise, I am mixed Japanese. The rest of my family is primarily English, and I am mixed generation as well. So I don't know if we're going to talk about generation, but for the Japanese community, diaspora generation is like kind of something people like to talk about, and I'm like, I don't know. Mixed generation.
I mean, that could certainly come up. We have a myriad of topics we want to discuss, and we'll see how many of them we get through.
Yeah,
we're all very eager. So yeah, just to give like a brief sort of introduction to the topic and like why we're here, why we're doing this panel, and why we have all these amazing people who I'm super excited to get to talk to here. Recently, I realized and then approached Daniel with the fact that I wanted to create some sort of discussion or panel focusing on the mixed race experience and our representation in TTRPGs and genre fiction in general, out of a growing feeling that the extent of the issues with depictions of mixed race characters had so much more to pick apart and discuss than is often the case. As a mixed race person of color, when I started playing D&D and TTRPGs in 2019, so I'm also a recent addition, I was immediately struck by just how poorly served people like me or like us are by D&D. And I immediately began editing lore and homebrewing my own races to feel better represented before I even knew how to play the game properly. But even despite my own efforts to alter aspects of D&D into a game where I felt I could be better represented and felt safer to explore those themes, I still encountered a lot of hurtful and harmful depictions and co-opting of mixed race narratives from others that I was playing with from the space at large. But that wasn't the first time, obviously, that I've encountered this problem, because the breadth of the mixed race experience rarely gets represented in fiction. In fantasy and sci-fi, and therefore in TTRPGs, when mixed race characters are depicted, it usually isn't in a way that actually represents mixed race people. Because more often than not, our representation comes in the form of half-human hybrids, a trope I'm sure we'll discuss in great detail later in this panel. These characters are humans mixed with aliens or fantasy races or monstrous creatures, often at the cause of harm, distress, or ostracization for the mixed race character. Often these characters or the human side of them will be white or portrayed by a white actor, yet this often seems to be our main form of representation in place of depicting mixed race human characters. So in Star Trek, for example, there are myriad examples of half human, half alien or mixed alien characters like Spock, B'Elanna, Troy, Naomi Wildman, Zial, but comparatively almost no mixed race human characters, despite the setting depicting this post-racial future where humans have the ability to travel all over the earth in the blink of an eye. And despite that, the existence of mixed race people is lacking in this utopian future. And then we come to the fantasy genre with its own numerous issues with depictions of race. But in D&D in particular, what I found is that on top of the usual harmful tropes and depictions is the fact that forms of being mixed race are turned into game mechanics for anyone to directly engage with. So you have playable half races with lore full of tired and uncomfortable stereotypes, and creatures that are so mixed race they've become deformed. Language used to degrade mixed race people is rampant in the depictions and descriptions of these races. And the mechanization of being mixed race encourages players of any background to potentially tell a story about being mixed race. But the foundation upon which they will be basing that story is full of harmful language, stereotypes, and tropes. So that's part of what we want to discuss today, to give a space for mixed race voices from different backgrounds to speak on what the world has been told is supposedly representative of us. Which is why I'm so excited to have all these wonderful people here from so many different backgrounds to learn from all of their experiences. But I also hope that this panel can provide some insight on the mixed experience and harmful depictions of us for non-mixed people as well. So given how huge this topic is and how clearly distilled these issues become in D&D, I think choosing to first approach this topic through that lens of D&D is a good starting point, but that doesn't mean we're limiting ourselves to only talking about D&D or TTRPGs, because obviously these tropes didn't spawn from nowhere. But I think discussing the various depictions of the mixed races in D&D would be a good starting point. And we've compiled like a little list, which I'm sure isn't conclusive, like of every single option that there is, but we have like half orcs and half elves, genasi, tieflings, Aasimar, Dampirs, and Mongrel folk. And I think it might be good to start with, we'll get to the Mongrel folk. But I think given that they're the sort of poster children for this topic in D&D, starting with the half orcs and half elves might be a good starting point. And I've already been talking for a while now, so I'd love to hand it over to one of my fellow panelists to discuss sort of the background of half orcs and half elves and the different ways in which they're coded and the depiction of being mixed race that comes along with them. If anyone would love to volunteer, or I can pick someone.
Well, it's kind of a loaded thing because you start from the depiction of orcs themselves. I'm going to tackle the half orc for a second. You start from the depiction of orcs themselves, which have been discussed beforehand as going back to the Tolkien-esque explanation of it as being Mongolians. Okay, that was the very explicit. It wasn't even hidden. He said it outright. This was the basis for what he created the orcs from. Okay, then if you look at that description and then you look at the half orc description from original D&D, okay, you're talking about one, almost universally a child of sexual assault. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's not a fun way to begin life. Oh. And two, it actually gets into, aside from the language, which we'll get into in a bit, I'm sure, it gets into like 15% of them are of this higher stock, which is more human than orc. And that starts getting into, well, if you have a parent here and a parent here, and you're going to start talking about percentiles, and that, and the name itself of half orc gets into blood quantums, which is fractionalization or percentages of your culture and segmenting it off. And I've been vocal about this all over the place, but blood quantums of that nature are designed explicitly and solely for discrimination. And it's not just discrimination from like a white majority, but it's also discrimination from the POC group to exclude people from their group. Okay, because anytime that and I'm sure everybody here has had a conversation like this, where you're talking to someone from a group that you are a part of. Like I'm talking to a Korean person or a Latinate person, and I say, well, I'm Korean. And then they get the response, well, you're half Korean.
Too real.
Which
are you really? Are you really though? Like,
So, I mean, there's so much loaded language in that, from like the blood quantums, from talking about which presents more. Like anybody who's ever felt like there's a real world story. My grandfather, after meeting him since 30 years, I hadn't seen him in 30 years. I meet him again. He's like, oh, you seem pretty Korean. Like, what? Like, I'm at a loss. This is so frustrating because like he intended that as a compliment. I don't want to take over the whole conversation, but the feelings that I get from talking about just the very basics of it and how it's presented.
Mm. Like even the fact that they are called the half orcs, and it's just left to your imagination that the other half is human, but the other half is intended to be human.
Yeah.
Which is the white coded.
Yeah, it's only the half of the other, the half of the exotic that matters. I mean, there are even, and this is a discussion that I'd be interested in some of your opinions on. There's even a discussion within the mixed race community with regards to mixed POC individuals like myself, who are two different POC groups mixed, or predominantly 2 or 3 mixed POC groups that are mixed, versus the quote white mix. and that, and it harkens back to people who are in the mixed community who refer to themselves and have to refer to themselves because this is the way the communication works with folks. Well, I'm half this, or I'm mixed this, and the other is the assumed white, you know. And I mean, I've actually had communication from mixed people who are like, well, we shouldn't include them in the conversation. They don't really know what it's like. And it's like, we get excluded from all the conversations. Why are you trying to exclude people who are in our group?
We're
from
gatekeeping our own gate-kept community.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think the interesting thing is I've never really felt the urge to play one of the so-called half races in D&D. I mean, when I first opened the 5th edition book and was looking at the descriptions of half elves and half orcs, I was very like that was my feeling. And as far as half orcs go, you know, if historically you look back on older editions of D&D, they were really there to be like, okay, you want to be a bad guy, but you also want to be good. Well, you can be a half orc, and it's that has been retconned and tweaked a lot over the various editions of D&D, but it's still there to a large extent. And you know, if you read the language that makes up the 5th edition handbook, there's a lot of, you know, telltale signs of how, like, okay, these half orcs, their orc ancestry is more predominant, yet it is tempered by their human, typically white human ancestry. So they have things like, you know, when they lose all their hit points and go down to 0, they get back up at 1 because they've got the so-called, you know, savage orc durability and whatnot. However, you know, they are capable of forming relationships with other individuals like a human. So you very much have this kind of veneer of, okay, you are born from a race that is cloaked in what earlier editions of the game would just flat out call like savagery and barbarism, whatever. However, you are tempered. You're one of the good ones because of human blood, or you can choose to be one of the good ones because of human blood. And so D&D is moving away from that, but it's still there, and it's been there. It's been there in various fantasy games derived from D&D. You know, Pathfinder flat out said at one point that like half orcs get the worst of both worlds, in that humans don't really like them because they look too orcish, and orcs don't like them because they're too humanesque, which actually resonated to me to an extent, in that was an experience that I often felt for my entire life. But still, you know, the mechanics, when you get really down into the gritty nature of, okay, all of the stuff I do is, you know, emblematic of my unbridled orc wildness. It's really not great. I will say that if I had to pick between half orcs and half elves, I probably would pick half orcs, because I don't like half elves for a different reason, in that they're the opposite end of the spectrum, in that if half orcs are this, you know, unbridled wildness, half elves are kind of the fetishized, you know, beauty of what happens when a typically Caucasian person and the glorious elf marry, and you create this like idealized hybrid that manages to walk through life with an ethereal beauty, you know, trapped between worlds.
Yeah,
and
I want to.
Yeah, and if you read those, oh yeah, sure, go ahead.
You know, it just reminds me, that kind of talk reminds me of something that I just heard, and probably maybe a lot of you have heard throughout your life, where people will talk about, oh, but I love half Asian babies, they're so cute.
Mixed race babies.
Mixed race babies. Yeah. And just like,
and that
these are children, not designer bags.
Mixed race babies is a huge tag on Instagram.
Yeah.
No,
oh my God.
Like the fetishization of mixed race babies is like this huge thing, to the point that there is a massive tag on Instagram just for that.
They do know those grow up to be mixed race adults that then have a lot of things to say.
Yeah.
But that is the reason why I actually me personally, and not everybody's like this, but why I dislike half elves a little bit more, because they remind me of you know, for most of my life, I grew up, I didn't really know who I was. Like, I'm sure that's a shared experience amongst a lot of mixed race people. And I felt I was ugly, or I went through that weird experience where you're mixed race, where you're like in your teens and you're growing like everyone else, and you hit puberty and you just look, you know, you look different, and people will often point it out. And then suddenly I remember hitting a point in high school and college where, you know, people were talking about like mixed race babies. And I knew people in my friend circle of Asian descent who were like, oh, I want a white boyfriend so I can have a mixed race baby, or I want a white girlfriend so I can have a beautiful kid. And I really did not like hearing that, and half elves remind me of that personally.
I can see that. They're definitely the more the more like European coded, exotic, beautiful coded of the two.
The loftier of the two.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I'm always so struck by the differences in the way the half-orcs and half-elves are presented, with the bias against the more racially coded characters, which would be the half-orcs. So like, yeah, the half-elves are more European coded. They are granted a longer lifespan. It talks about their beauty and their ability to use their mixed heritage to gain like diplomatic advantage, gaining a charisma bonus to reflect that. And then there's the half-orcs, who are the more racialized and are depicted more as like battling with the brutish, evil orc side of their heritage, and they have shorter lifespans than humans.
It flat out says that a lot of half orcs fall into menial labor, like in the book. What it says. Or like they fight in gladiatorial arenas, whereas the half elves are the ones that get to be diplomats and negotiate peace between two worlds. And something about that really bothers me.
Well, it's the two major tropes of mixed race, right? Like, you got the aberration and then the hybrid vigor garbage. It's like the worst of two worlds and then the best of two worlds. It's like, great.
I wonder how much of that comes into the idea that half elves, as they're depicted in the book and literature and stuff like that, can basically pass, whereas half orcs can't.
And that was something, like, I don't know so much about all of the different races in D&D, so I did like a quick search and read up on a general description of how to handle like the mechanics and character backgrounds and things for mixed race characters, and it was talking about percentages. Well, if they have like 3 parents that are from a particular race, then they count entirely as that race. I'm like, no, that's not how that works. And like,
that sounds very uncomfortably like some things I've heard in real life.
And so the whole article is about what counts as what based on what the term you're using before, like blood quantum, which Daniel pointed out in our notes. And I was thinking too, I'm mostly familiar with the term blood quantum when it comes to the like legal classification of indigenous peoples in North America, where it actually legally determines who you are and your position within the country.
Yeah, it was also blood quantums have that and are still in place today there. You would have also seen blood quantums historically in a legal sense when talking about things like the one drop rule and mixed race marriages, which were illegal at a time in this country for a very long time until the Loving v. Georgia. I'm a lawyer. I should know this.
I think it's Loving v. Georgia.
But which is why I still celebrate Loving Day, which is a phenomenally named day. But yeah, it's been, blood quantums are still enacted when discussing American indigenous status, but it has a long legal history that basically goes to the beginning of the country.
Yeah, it's Loving v. Georgia. All right.
Yeah. So there's not just like a social aspect to this. There is legal, and it's really hard not to take some of that when looking at D&D stuff or fantasy stuff, to be like, hold on, it's not just like, ew, you don't belong here, or I don't know what to do with you because you're not from a single background. It's like,
and when dealing with that, because we hearken on what the books say and how the rules format it and the mechanics of it, because as we were pointing out earlier, there are a lot of people out there who are not of mixed status, who don't understand the life experience of that, and what they're going to base it on are tropes in media and the mechanics of the book. And I can see a circumstance where somebody reads the whole, if you have 3 out of the 4 grandparents type thing, and creating, wouldn't it be a dramatic situation if, and then creating some sort of blood quantum elven kingdom that this person is not accepted into, and thinking, ooh, this will be fun and cool and interesting. And like one of us sitting there going, I'm trying not to slap you right now.
Yeah, you're fully sitting at the table and you're like, really? In front of my salad, we're playing this? Is this what we're gonna do? I have to sit through a Negaverse Phil Collins song of 2 worlds, no family. I'm doing this? Okay.
I mean,
Sorry.
another whole interesting thing specifically about D&D is the fact that just half orcs and half elves are listed as separate races in the player's handbook, which has been the tradition for D&D for a long time. But if you delve a little bit further into that, it's always typically a human and an orc, or a human and an elf. You know, you don't really see dwarven and orc babies, or halfling and elf babies. And you know, previous editions of D&D, like Dark Sun, had half dwarves, and but really it's half elf and half orc have been the thing, and it's always human. Which is actually just very limiting, not just from a lore perspective, but from a human perspective. Because if you go to Reddit, there are all these threads being like, well, what happens when like a tiefling and an orc fall in love and have a baby? And people are like jumping through hoops, just being like, well, humans have, you know, more sex, so therefore they're the ones who are going to make half orcs and half babies. There are people that say,
you know what it is.
Yeah, you're right.
It's humans are desirable. Humans are coded as the whites. Humans are more desirable. The other mixes, the other cultures, because they're coded as exotic, are not as desirable.
Mm-hmm.
So what? Like, why would you want to get with a dwarf woman? That doesn't make any sense in my, you know.
I mean, the thing is, my first D&D character was a human ranger who fell in love with a dwarf. So there we go, right there. That was my first thing. I'm going to challenge.
Well, that's the thing is we're limited by not only the depiction, but also like the act of mechanizing being mixed race, so that you do have a category for half orc where the other half is human, and a category for half elf where the other half is again presumed to be human, but you don't have the tools with which to create a tiefling genasi or a halfling dwarf or something like that. You don't you when you sort of quantify it in one realm, that means therefore it's limited in all the other areas of the game, and then you get these very uncomfortable conversations going on about like how do we like portray through stats and mechanics and numbers the act of being the identity of being mixed race. And that's only sort of a lot of the time accounting for sort of a half and half, to use that language, mixture of like a half orc, implying that mixed race people are always half one thing, half another thing, which is not the case, as we can see from the diversity of people on this panel alone. And then you get another race I find very interesting personally in D&D are the Genasi, because when me and Sonia are always there repping the Genasi, because I remember when I was reading the half orcs and the half elves and being very disappointed by what they offered in terms of theming and uncomfortable narratives around them and stuff. I then later on found the Genasi, which firstly are sort of the influence for them comes from like one of my own cultural backgrounds. Whether or not they handle that well is another matter, but the fact is that that was there, so I was drawn to it for that reason, but also because they are described with a lot of the language used around a mixed race character, but they are not a half genie, they are a genasi, they are their own thing. And within that, there are different subgroups, which to me, and I'm not saying that Wizards of the Coast intended this at all, it's something that I read into it, but I often play it as this idea that all genasi are united in being genasi, but there are the different sort of elements of like air, fire, water, and earth, which have their own differences, just like no two mixed race people are necessarily have exactly the same background, but they are united in being mixed race. And that was something that I always sort of read into it, and really enjoy playing them for that reason, within the right spaces where the story will be treated well.
Yeah, because I play also, like, if you follow me on Twitter, everybody knows that one of my favorite characters is my rowdy air genasi. And like usually when I tackle like creating a character in D&D, my default is I'm going to ignore that racial background blurb on D&D Beyond, because I know that is just a veritable minefield. D&D canon, I don't know her. So when I actually went back and read the stuff about the genasi, I was just like, oh, wait a second. This is very like something like, it's not all good. And it's not necessarily like all on point, but there is like a lot of like language that is used that often like, is indicative of like what I feel is like a like kind of common thing within like the mixed race experience. And I was very actually kind of surprised by that. And like my fellow player who plays my Genasi's twin brother, he suggested it, but then I also realized like I'm very drawn to like that kind of like character type. And then I kind of dug in like, oh, yeah, that checks out.
Mhm.
As opposed to like half orcs or half elves, because I remember like the first time I did my first like stint of a D&D was back in like 2009 or something like that. I don't remember what edition that was, but I was reading the book, and I remember specifically reading the thing about half elves and how they are half breeds that come from two different worlds, but are loved by none. Again, like the Negaverse Phil Collins song or whatever. And I just remember as a child reading so many books about like with like language like half breed and they're unwanted, that I remember the one time I played a half elf, I actually went out of my way in my handwritten backstory. Like, she is not discriminated because she is a half elf. She is looked weirdly because she is a cleric of the Raven Queen, and people don't think that she's gonna heal them.
That's fair.
Like,
that's fair.
Yeah. Like, how's that gonna work? But yeah, like I would go out of my way to deliberately like avoid those negative stereotypes or just like the common tropes, just because while my life is rich and there are many other things like happening in it, those little bits of just like being called like a half breed or just like not being accepted by any of the communities I come from, it's just such a, not a major point of pain, but rather just like a stack of minor annoyances that lead to a quarterly identity crisis. But like, I just wanted to avoid that. It's just like, why do I want to bring this into my fantasy world? I'm here to have fun, not to relive my own personal trauma, which makes it very difficult because of the addition of like, you know, half orcs and half elves, it gives white people some kind of a boldness to feel like they can play into the tragic mulatto tropes. And meanwhile, you're sitting there like, this is really happening. Or in my case, it kind of, so I'm gonna like, it kind of gives like, as if some people weren't bold enough to talk about issues that they don't know anything about. It gives sometimes white players the boldness to speak on mixed race issues that they know nothing about. Like, so going back to like me going through my quarterly year identity crisis, people that know me on Twitter, mainly I post art or TTRPG stuff. At one point I started doing like a Twitter stream of consciousness thread about me being mixed race and how I feel like I don't belong to any particular culture, despite the fact that I want to connect with these different cultures. The fact that my friends are like, hey, Sonia, you should try for this, like, you know, black character designer thing that Cartoon Network's doing. And I quietly say, thank you. And I put it aside because I feel like I do not belong in that community or that I'm taking up valuable space, and just kind of going through like, oh, I feel like I'm appropriating my own cultures and all that stuff. And then this one person, this one white guy who did not even follow me, and I'm not talking about tabletop at all in this space, had the boldness to come up and say, well, think of it in the way of half elves. And I'm like, first of all, one, who are you? Second of all, this is not about tabletop. This is not the time to be bringing up tabletop mechanics to a mixed race person that's going through something like this right now. And again, three, who are you to speak on this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to just like compare someone's real life experience to a work of fiction that wasn't created by mixed race people.
Yeah, it's just like
that wasn't and yeah, I've experienced exactly the same, like just to speak in solidarity for a moment, I've experienced exactly the same thing of like over here we have the term BAME, which I hate, for Black and minority ethnic. It's like, I don't know, people don't like that term being used as like a generalization for all people of color over here, but it's what's used in a lot of things like application grants for arts funding and stuff like that. And yeah, I once was told about like a theater like arts application grant thing that was specifically for BAME people by a friend of mine who's also a person of color but not mixed race, and was told, you could probably try applying for this, but you might not be BAME enough though. And
no.
Oh,
no.
So yeah, that's the kind of language that's used a lot, and also the kind of language that ends up in these D&D character descriptions, race descriptions of, and like, then, they're stuck between two worlds, they don't count in either.
Yeah, and like it's just, it gives also them, like, white people the boldness to play within these spaces alongside of us. Like, so like, say for instance, I'm playing at a table and I don't want that particular narrative to be explored because again, it's fantasy. Why would I want to bring in my real life trauma? But sometimes people who are not mixed or white people feel like, oh, it's like sad backstory seasoning or something like that. Like they just Salt Bay the mixed race thing in to like, it's like, oh yeah, so they lost their parents, they have great laws, they were picked on as a kid. How can I make them sadder? Let's add mixed race into the mix, which is just like, oh, is that how you see us in particular? Is just tragic like again, sad backstory seasoning.
Part of your tragic backstory. Sorry.
Go ahead, Emma.
I can see how people would be drawn to it in terms of that sense of being an outsider, but what should be coming out of this panel is that there's so much more to it, to the people who actually are labeled as mixed race outside of fantastical settings, and some of the language that's used to talk about it. What strikes me is that it's always considered odd, that any kind of mixed raceness is just odd. And like, that's something that we have in the real world, despite the fact that there are millions of mixed race people.
When I tell people, like when I tell people the full laundry list of what I am, is supposed to just going, I'm just going to say I'm Filipino because this is going to make your head pop if I tell you the full thing. But like they immediately, their next question oftentimes is, how did that happen? How does that happen?
I mean, have you guys ever gotten somebody to straight up ask you, what are you? Like,
all the time.
What are you? Where are you from?
To guess.
My favorite is when it's a man hitting on me in a bar and they think it's like a compliment to hit on a mixed race woman and be like, what are you? You're so exotic. I'm just like, I leave now.
The
interesting
thing is how this affects us personally. Like when people used to ask me, what are you in college? I would take it as a compliment because I would think that I like fit into the like ethnic, the exotic ethnic other. Like I can't easily place you, therefore I'm talking to you, therefore I'm striking up a conversation with you, and therefore I think like you're attractive. Like it is like these things do, I think, affect us in a not so good way, in that I was Kimchi, you talked about in our chat how we tend to quantify ourselves as mixed race people. We get very used to saying I am like 50% white, or like I am 50% black, or I am 35% Asian and stuff like that. And so we end up
roll up with that ancestry.com
you break yourself up into these different categories. And for some of my life, I was kind of proud of doing that because I felt like this made me more special or more interesting, when in reality, I think I was kind of just feeding kind of other people's fascination with, me being different and me being unexplainable, which I don't think is that's not a great way to perceive people as individuals. You're just obsessed with the idea that, oh, how did your mom meet your dad? Or like, how do your families get together at weddings and stuff like that? You're not actually like interested in a person as an individual. You're kind of just interested in the strangeness of them.
Fascination.
The fascination, which I think, unfortunately, half elves and half orcs in the game embody very much so.
And can we talk about how the idea of being mixed is a tragedy?
Exactly.
Which seems like it seems like a wild concept to me, because I would
either a tragedy or like a crazy occurrence, like how did that happen?
Once in a millennia.
It has to be foretold by prophecy, but it's kind of a circumstance where I think of, like, in a sense, okay, for all that I can say about my parents, right and wrong, it was like they got over this. They're still together. And to me, it's kind of lovely that and indicative, like the loving case, that, hey, this happens and it's wonderful when it happens. Like, this is great. Like, this is, I don't know if I would go so far as like, this is what everybody should be aspiring to at this point. But, as a person who is a product of a mixed race union that's still going strong, years after, and as a person who is in a mixed race relationship with mixed children who are further mixed, if you want to use that type of terminology, to me, it's wonderful. I mean, one, anybody who's mixed generally doesn't have a choice but to be in a mixed relationship, because like, I'm not dating my brother, but
I had that conversation with someone in university where, in an abstract way, they're like, I don't know if I support mixed race couples. I'm like, you know who you're talking to right now, right? I'm like, everything I do is mixed race. Get out of here.
I think
mixed race breakfast. I have.
I think this quite neatly circles back to something, two tropes that have been brought up, but we haven't like fully sort of dissected yet, which was Sonia brought up the tragic mulatto trope or archetype, and then earlier I also mentioned the half-human hybrid, and these are sort of the two main tropes that a lot of characters or fiction about mixed race people tend to end up falling into.
Mm-hmm.
And oof. So yeah, the tragic mulatto, which Sonia brought up, is the word mulatto comes from like the Spanish and Portuguese word for a person of specifically mixed African and European ancestry, but like the commonality of the trope kind of means that nowadays the name of the trope can be potentially applied to a lot of different mixed race characters. And there are other versions of the trope, like the tragic mestizo, I think, which refers to a person of mixed European and Native American ancestry. And the trope tragic mulatto basically refers to a story in which a mixed race person is depicted as like so depressed and sad because of being mixed race, unable to fit into any side of society. And it was often about sort of, in the classical sense, it was about, those stories were typically about like women who could potentially pass as white, later on finding out that they had a black relative, and that therefore made them like ineligible for their marriage and fortune. And then they like fell down in their lot in life and all that stuff. And then the half-human hybrid is this idea that you have like, you represent being mixed race by having a character who is the result of like interspecies romance, such as like between a human and an alien, or a fantasy creature, or a monster. Spock. And then like Spock or
Alucard in Castlevania.
Like,
there's so many of them.
and Star Trek is littered with it. And this is a topic that I mentioned in my video, but it's a circumstance where you will see the half-human hybrid all the time. Like almost every single Star Trek series has a half-human hybrid. I have, what was it? At the time of the video, I said that there might have been one, and I think there might have been two now with the new show, Picard, mixed race individuals in the entire 60, 70 year run.
I think you and I actually tried to like count them on Twitter, and we came up with like
Keiko
Miles
O'Brien.
and Keiko's two children, who are both literally children and don't really pertain much to the story.
Yeah.
And then there's like Raffi in Picard.
Yeah.
I think. And maybe her son, I believe.
Well, and that's it. That's it. And thankfully, Raffi from Picard is actually played by a mixed actor, which I mean almost never happens. As a fan of musicals, I think of Miss Saigon, played by Jonathan Pryce.
I have a complicated relationship with Miss Saigon because I know so many. I have a lot of people in my life that have played Kim, but at the same time, that damn play.
It's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. But yeah, it's frustrating that you see like interspecies or half orc, half elf. It's basically the same concept, because in the second edition D&D book, they actually provide a definition that race in D&D is more like species. Okay. Now here's the thing. While not conclusive, most often the separation between species is based on whether or not you can breed together. Okay. And if you breed, is that offspring viable? Like a mule cannot breed afterwards, right? The horse and donkey mix and all that. And I'm using these animal examples, and it gets a little weird, but like it's frustrating to me that the scientific leap of alien with human is something everybody's fine with in Star Trek. We just let it go. Or in fantasy, we just let it go. But mixing cultures, no. That breaks the verisimilitude. That's too much for my suspension of disbelief.
And that's the thing, is like that trope in particular is so ubiquitous, and it's there in the place of actual mixed race representation. Like you said, in Star Trek, there are more half alien or alien mixed characters than there are human mixed race characters. And it's everywhere. You know, there's like Hellboy, Star-Lord, Tannis Half-Elven, Hagrid, like Seymour and Terra from Final Fantasy. Just, it's like ubiquitous in fantasy and sci-fi fiction.
From a storytelling trope, it's just an easy storytelling trope perspective. It's just an easy way to create some kind of empathy in a character by being like, oh, here is the demon or the devil or the alien, but they're half human, so therefore they're going to emote the same way you emote, and you're going to be able to feel something for them, and we're going to try to fixate on that as like a window in for the audience. And
yeah,
or
like go ahead.
Or it's supposed to be sort of like a biological basis for internal conflicts and like external conflict, but it's supposed to be like, no, on like a bioessential basis, this is a point of conflict.
Yeah, you see that especially. So I mean, you see it in everything, but like especially in Star Trek, just because it's on the brain. I was arguing with Star Trek fans on Twitter this morning because I like the new Ferengi design. But yeah, there's often this depiction, and you see it with like Spock and B'Elanna, of like the character battling against one side of their heritage, and it's usually the non-human side, which is the more monstrous or foreign or POC coded side. So you see that with the half-orcs, where they're always battling against the brutal evil orc side of them, quote unquote. And then you see it with B'Elanna, who is always battling against her Klingon heritage and is depicted as like inherently angry and irritable because she's half Klingon, and she's always spoken in that way by other characters, including like her husband in the show, which is super uncomfortable.
Or the episode where some aliens actually separate her two sides, so she becomes two separate people, a Klingon and a human. And they have a little like
until you mentioned it.
It's bad. That's a whole ass they love to torture B'Elanna in that show, and it's sad because like, and I think we can talk about this in a little bit, is there's like this sort of complicated feeling around this trope, because sometimes it was a form of representation when there was none. I really liked B'Elanna, but she's not treated well by that show. Like, the majority of the episodes that focus on her are about her being half Klingon and in some way having to like battle with that. And then that episode you just mentioned, Emma, is like probably just like the worst one for that, other than the one where she has flashbacks to being bullied for being half Klingon and everyone tells her, you just need to get over it. But yeah, she's like literally split into like, it comes back to that blood quantum thing of like, you can literally be like split into two separate halves. One is Klingon, one is human, and the Klingon goes around screaming at everyone and causing trouble. And the human is just sad and depressed.
Two people inside of you, and
that's not how it works, folks.
You're never a whole, but you're somehow multiple people at the same time.
I think part of the reason I've never really felt represented by any of these so-called half races in any TV show or whatever is because they're always like, oh, I'm the result of a human and an alien, making a baby, and I am constantly at war with like my alien side or my orc side or whatever. Like, I'm constantly going to fall into, bad orc habits, and basically the worst side of me is going to come out. And that always felt to me like an uber simplification of the actual dynamics of what it is like to be mixed race as written by someone who is not mixed race. Like, I do not, like, growing up, I did not necessarily like ever plan on, falling into my Asian side or, my Jewish side or something like that. I had conflicts with both sides of me. Like, when I hung out at family gatherings on my dad's side of the family, I completely felt out of place because I was never really in touch with my Jewish heritage. And then when I hung out with Asian kids in school, one of the experiences that I'll always remember is I was hanging out at my friend's house and it was just all Asian kids. And then my dad came to pick me up, and the mother who answered the door was like, "Oh, I didn't expect to see a white father here." And it was really just strange to me at the time. There were conflicts on both sides, and all of it ended up just making me feel like I was different and unusual, and that, my experiences were not valid because nobody else I knew really had the same experience except for my brother. Like, I didn't know too many other mixed race kids growing up. And ultimately, I've never really seen that in fiction, in genre fiction. It's always just, oh, I'm bad because I'm going to be more like my orc side than my human side. There's never any conflict with like the human side as well, or like there's never a fully fledged mixed race individual, at least in any of the in any of the fiction or any of the movies that I've consumed. I mean, Daniel in our chat brought up some better examples of, for example, like Miles Morales. He's probably a better example of a mixed race individual that I feel like is more fully formed,
realized and
realized.
he feels like a real person.
Yeah,
not a series
I would like
of
to
tropes.
see more of that. Yeah, I want to see more of that. And but those examples are very few and far between. You know, Miles Morales came up when he originated when I was already like, you know, a fully grown teenager, and so I never really had that formative kind of fully fledged, healthy mixed race individual to look up to, at least in fiction. And that's why when these examples come up of, you know, characters in Star Trek, or like Alucard in Castlevania, I'm like, okay, like he's just mixed for the sake of a genre trope. He's not really mixed
for the sake of a genre trope, but also I feel sometimes they put a mixed race character to elevate the cast around. Like, oh, we're going to show how ignorant everybody is, but also we're going to show that the cast still loves you in spite of what you are, and they hang out with you still. Like, that's messed up. But going back to like Miles Morales, like for me, like that was one of my big like, oh, we have what's some good like, you know, examples of mixed race representation. And it took me a while because most of it is like very unnuanced, very like about the depth of a like drying puddle of water in terms of like how like in depth we can get, or like just dialogue is so cringeworthy that I have to fully close my laptop. I'm like, that's enough for today.
What was that show going viral a while ago?
Ginny and Georgia. Where in Ginny and Georgia, the girl is there are two mixed race kids talking, and the guy's like, well, you're not in touch with your black side. It's like, well, you benefit from the model minority myth, and it's so bad.
No human talks like this.
No human talks like this.
I thought it was a parody.
Same.
And then it was like, oh no, this is
I thought
legit.
It was a comedy sketch.
This is a whole
it's
Netflix
a clip
show.
from a real show.
Yeah.
I was looking for the Funny or Die logo in the corner, and it just
it
wasn't there.
But like going back to Miles, like I'm gonna specifically talk about like Into the Spider-Verse because I adore that movie, and the way I'd be like, well, how can we show good mixed race representation? Into the Spider-Verse does this within the span of maybe 45 seconds. And it's in the very beginning of the movie where he is about to go to school. And you suddenly see his family life come at you like in a tornado. His dad's asking for a ride. His mom's speaking to him in Spanish. He's getting food from the like the rice cooker thing. And you can tell like this is all stuff that's part of his family life and culture. And then and he responds to his mom in Spanish. His mom speaks with an accent. And then it expands out further when he goes by his old school as he's going to his new school. And you see him interacting with his classmates. He speaks Spanish to some of his classmates even before he heads off, and then eventually he gets picked up by his dad to take him to the new academy. That is for me like one of the best like things of like mixed race representation I've seen, because as a person in the theater, I am not Afro-Latino, but seeing that on screen made me really freaking happy because it showed, one, this kid is mixed race, but also he is cherished and loved by the people around him, and he is included and in this community, and he is not ousted for it. He is a part of them, and it's like his being mixed race is not a point of pain. And that made me real happy.
Yeah, it's never it's not the origin of conflict. It's not part of the tragedy. It's just something that's him.
It's
because
part of the rich tapestry that makes Miles who he is.
Because too often when you have a mixed character, that's their gimmick. That's their thing. It's like Belana Torres. They're gonna, whenever it's a storyline about her, boom, we're gonna talk about the mixed thing. We're gonna talk about the mixed thing. We're gonna talk about the mixed thing.
And it's rarely done well. That's just, I mean, like I just rarely find it satisfying.
And like Daniel brought it up in our chat, like if we go from the good side to the numerous bad examples we had more recently, Shadow and Bone. I haven't watched it yet, but the second that I heard that they decided to do this was like, wow, that was a choice. Where in the original books, the author was like, oh, my cast is like super, super white and there's not much diversity. I'm going to change that for the TV show. I'm like, great, cool. Alita is Asian. Within 15 minutes of the first episode airing, they make her Shu, which is the code for like half Asian in the Grisha verse or the Greg verse or whatever. And within like 15 minutes of the first episode happening, they start throwing Asian slurs at her. You call her rice eater, and then they show like really gross anti-Asian propaganda and stuff. And her being half Shu is just constantly just like a point of pain, and people, they just use it in the show to, you know, illustrate she's different, she is an outcast, and they throw these racial slurs at her, but also like it serves absolutely no purpose. Again, I'm going to just refer to it. It was sad backstory seasoning.
Yeah.
Where like I think there's a character later on in the show that is actually Shu, but Alina has no interest in like, you know, talking to them or pursuing like, you know, what is my cultural identity, or whatever. And just like, and even on the base level of like that trope of like, oh, we're going to throw in the sad story seasoning so that we can show you overcoming it because you're better than this. They don't even do that in Shadow and Bone. It's just there and it's never talked about. It's just there to cause pain. And it kind of makes me sad because I know that the person that was kind of in charge of those writing decisions was actually Asian. And I remember seeing on Twitter when the people were first talking about this and the issues with it, she deliberately said, yeah, for the mixed race kids, this is going to hurt. And while it is important for people to understand how, you know, the treatment of mixed race kids and all that stuff is just, it can be a point of pain as a result of like, you know, feeling like we don't count, feelings of isolation and whatnot. Those are important things to acknowledge and realize. You can still do harm, especially like be like, oh, but she's Asian. How could she do harm? You can still do harm to your own community. Case in point, see like the whole discussion we had on Asians Represent pertaining to Killian Liu. Story was written by an Asian person, perpetuated so many harmful stereotypes that, you know, hurt and whatnot.
And
I mean,
yeah,
I think
definitely the same with Shadow and Bone.
I think it would be disingenuous for us to point towards the white community and just say, that's it. That's where it's from. For me, being rejected from the POC communities that I should be a part of happens. It happens a lot. And it's one of those things where it's like, look, this is where I was trying to go for refuge, and you slam the door in my face.
Yeah.
You know, I've constantly had to, I feel like I have to prove my Koreanness or prove my Latina heritage. And I've told this story before, and this was with my partner years ago. It was like years and years ago. Where we were listening to some music and some reggaeton came on, and I was like, "Oh, I love this song." And she's like, "How do you know reggaeton?" I am Puerto Rican. Like, it's music's from the island. I don't understand what the question is.
Yeah,
like,
it's.
I know. Is it just because you don't see it in my face? But like, and that's all the time. You know, just like. Reminding people, and on the other hand, I've had to deal with this sort of odd internalized shame where if I do something that gains acceptance from one group, I feel like I'm betraying the other group. You know, like we're on a panel here on Asians Represent, and there's a small part of my brain that's going like, yeah, but when's the last Latin thing you did? When was the last time you were on a Latin stream or you were trying to represent that part of your culture, you know? And I was like, okay, yeah, but
you're like, listen, brain.
Yeah, it's not time for my quarterly identity crisis. Going on a second.
I think that's something like I know all of us probably. Like, I would definitely want people to understand from this is that like that animosity doesn't only ever come from like the white side of your family or from white people because not all mixed race people are part white, but like it doesn't only ever come from white people. It can come from other people of color as well.
I mean, it come from within your own family.
I ended up moving to Asia for almost 10 years because for most of my 20s because I felt like I wasn't Asian enough growing up, and that like made me feel like, oh, I need to learn Chinese. I need to like get a major in East Asian studies. I need to like feel like I'm connected with this part of my heritage. I need to become Asian, basically. Like that was
form up Voltron or whatever.
And you know, only after living in like Taiwan and Hong Kong for almost 10 years did I not just like did that thought kind of finally wither and die, because I realized that you know, obviously when I moved overseas that okay, I'm very American in many ways, like I'm a foreigner here, but I realized that, okay, I'm just me. I don't need to be Asian. I don't need to try to make up for the fact that, in college, when I tried to join the Chinese Students Association, this guy made fun of me for not being able to speak Chinese and not being able to sing a Jay Chou song in karaoke. I don't know. I've never seen that represented in media.
Yeah.
I would like to.
I think my constant sort of feeling throughout my life has very often been the feeling of not fitting into any side of your culture, which is like very common for mixed race people. But because my background is so varied and there's such a mixture, and just due to the circumstances of where certain members of my family live and what contact I have with them or not, just always feeling like very separated, for example, from like the Asian side of my heritage, and never ever feeling Asian enough. Like when Daniel first asked me to be on Asians Represent to do critical read Al-Qadim, I was like, oh, I don't know if I should. Like, I literally had that feeling and had to be validated from an outside source before I would feel comfortable to do that. And now I think, because I've been doing this a while, I think I would feel more comfortable to just like put that forward myself. But there is just always this like conflict within my own family, where I've had arguments with people from one side of the family about like issues of race and racism. And that's a member of my family, but then I'm sat there arguing with them about things like gollywogs and things like representation in media and blackface and stuff like that. And I'm just sat there like, I'm supposed to like love this person, but I'm now arguing with them about something that is like deeply upsetting, and they are taking the opposite stance.
And that's like another thing that I think adds to our feelings of just constantly like why we have like what I keep calling the quarterly year identity crisis, is because not only are we gatekept from our own like communities and cultures, on a closer point, we are gatekept from our communities and cultures sometimes via the way that our family talks about us.
Yes.
Like for example, like with my like Filipino side, if I've heard so many, like I've not heard through the grapevine that like some of my relatives will say some of the most disgusting anti-Black things, and now we will not go hang out with them, which is like one upside of the pandemic, because I don't have to see them at Christmas anymore. Or my uncle saying really anti-Black shit to my dad's face, and my dad's getting so frustrated. It's like, I'm Black, right? He's like, you're Black? Or like if the Asian sides, like even like for me, I'm Hakka Chinese, and they're even discriminated by the larger Chinese community. Like one of my relatives went into a store in Chinatown down in Boston, and she accidentally spoke Hakka, and the store owner turned her back and would not speak to her. And she told my aunt, do not let anybody ever know you're Hakka. And then if both the Hakka Chinese side and the Filipino side find that I'm Black, they form a racist Asian anti-Black Voltron. And they're like, no, you cannot be one of us. Oh. And it's just like, and then there's like the coded languages that sometimes we get, like me and my sister are the mixed race kids of the family. And I have been called half-breed. I have been called mutt. I have been called mongrel. I have been called a mixed breed dog since I was maybe about 10 years old. And this was a way that some people in my family would introduce me to their friends. That is the intro for them, for me. Like, oh yeah, this is Sonia. She's kind of like the halfie, the mutt of the family. I'm 10.
Yeah. And like, it's one of those things where it's like, hey, stop calling me mutt, Dad. Like getting that type of racism from your own parents, getting that type of racism from nearly everybody in your family, because the only people who actually, in a lot of the cases in a mixed race family, I know this is true for me, the only people who get it are my brothers. Like they understand. No one else in my family understands. And when my dad, it's like, hey, you're my little mutt. It's just like, I'm not a dog. Stop it. You just you stop it right now. And the type of language that is used for us is bizarre, because no one seems to think of it as being a slur. And to go to your point, Sonia, and to kind of bring this back to D&D for a second, throughout the discussions of half orcs and half elves in that first edition player's handbook, they are referred to as mongrels constantly. That's not even getting into Mongrel Men.
It's so there's these words, this language, mutt, mongrel, half-breed, which is as has been, thank you for saying it here and being like very raw and open with it, used to insult. It's practically a slur against mixed race people. Language that's literally used to describe dog breeding, like,
which I wouldn't even use for dogs right now.
Yeah,
like, I've never called a dog a mongrel. I mean, I hear people use mutts
outdated language for dog breeds. Not only is that language used to describe characters like half orcs and half elves, but there's literally an entire creature type called the Mongrel Folk, previously the Mongrel Men. And I just want to check with everyone before we start talking about that, whether everyone's okay.
Let's get into it. Let's get into it, because people need to know.
Prep for this.
I just find it funny that they're like, oh, we've made it not so bad. We
made
them folk
it
now.
Yeah, we made it non-gendered. That makes it okay.
It's a gender-neutral slur now.
Problems with the word. But yeah, this is a. I mean, they're usually in like monster manuals. I don't know if they are described as like a race or if they are like a creature type, but I'm going to use both those terms to describe them. But I did not know that this creature, this race existed until I watched Kimchi's amazing video about being mixed race in D&D. And until then it was like reiterated in our sort of group chat. And then I went to look them up, and I have never had such a viscerally negative reaction to racist D&D content. There's a lot of racist shit in D&D, and it's very painful to look at. But something, I mean, I know what it was about Mongrel Folk that just like cut me to my core. It's because it's describing what is ostensibly me, someone who is from like 5 or 6 different ethnic backgrounds, has like this huge mixture, and in terms of D&D, the way that's
our
depicted,
representation.
That is like. Mongrel folk are basically people who are so mixed race they are physically and mentally deformed, and I'm using the language that they use to describe them. I would like to read the description of the Mongrel folk from the 1989 Monster Manual. Be prepared to cringe and cry. Mongrel men are a mixture of the blood of many species: humans, orcs, gnolls, ogres, dwarfs, hobgoblins, elves, bugbears, bullywugs, and many others. Their appearance varies greatly, combining the worst features of their parent stocks. They are usually clad in dirty rags. They are ashamed of their appearance and try to keep their bodies concealed, especially among strangers. They have no distinct tongue of their own, but speak a debased common mixed with grunts, whistles, growls, and gestures. Their names often mimic animal noises, which brings us back to the whole thing of like the word mongrel being an outdated term for dogs. So yeah, in terms of D&D, people like myself and the others here are so mixed race that we are deformed, animalistic creatures with the worst features from all sides of our heritage.
I'm not a half elf. I'm not a half orc. I'm a fucking mongrel man. Like that's fucked up. Like at its base core, that is fucked up.
Now, if I may, so I'm ancient. I'm pretty old. So I know that some folks here have been getting into D&D recently. Picture in your mind 9-year-old Kimchi, right? Not well-fermented Kimchi, me. Like, picture like 9-year-old me sitting down with the old D&D books, because my dad had them. You know, I'm a second generation player. My dad was playing back in the way back. Because he was, you know, and I'm learning to read by looking at these books with the cool pictures, and I come across that as an impressionable 9-year-old, you know, and like I'm looking at it and I was like, wait a minute, why is it like I'm confused? And it was hard for me as a kid. Like I didn't experience this as an adult with a fully formed understanding and, you know, the ability to just be like, well, this is garbage. No, I was a kid internalizing this, trying to learn how to play this game with my family, with my brothers who were already playing, and you know, their friends. And it was like this cool thing that I wanted to get a part of, and seeing that. And it was crushing for me. So much so that I kind of repressed that memory for years until Ravenloft came out.
And then it brought it back.
And then it was like, oh, Curse of Strahd. Everybody's saying this is the best thing since sliced bread, best adventure they've ever made. Let's take a look. And I was like, wait a minute, I remember these. Mm-hmm. And I had that image, that little pencil drawn picture, you know, from the original Monster Manual, just flash into my head again. And like, it was jarring. It was jarring, and all of it just kind of rushed back.
I think that's the even more sort of shocking and painful thing, on top of how bad it is the fact that it's not even been relegated to D&D's dirty past yet. Like, this is in 5e, it's in Curse of Strahd. It's not only racist, it's also deeply ableist. There's the whole aspect of like, these people are like mentally affected by it that they're driven, again, using their language, quote unquote, mad. Mm-hmm. And they have to be like kept by this abbot in an abbey and for their own good, quote unquote. And there's so many different layers of horrific discomfort I have with this like creature in this game. And they do sort of lean more into the like animal like mashup thing now, but I don't know if that really helped, like removes it from it at all. Like,
that's
it
one
still
interesting thing. Like when I ran Curse of Strahd, I skipped my players did not go to that town. I just skipped that part. But I mean, I was familiar, we talked about this in our own chat, but I was familiar with their origins in the 90s, where basically they were considered to be like created by like a wizard as experiments, doppelgangers. It's a very much a horror focused origin, where like they're the patchwork humans, like Frankenstein, or, you know, kind of the horror trope where an amalgamation of different monster pieces comes together to make something. And so that's what Curse of Strahd leans into. However, you know, interesting thing is, after we talked about this, and, you know, Kimchi brought up the original origins of them, where they're just flat out the result of, you know, interbreeding. The interesting thing about even this horror trope is that it is born from the idea of fear of interracial relationships. Like, if you think about, like, you know, H.P. Lovecraft's Deep Ones, which are basically fish folk, like their whole origin story is they are people born from like the spawn of Dagon in the sea and the people that live in Innsmouth, the villagers. And so they are, you know, crossbreeds, and that's why we should be afraid of them, because they represent the quote unquote degeneracy of interracial breeding. And I think even if you try to flavor the Mongrel Folk with this horror tinged origin, you're still going to get bits and pieces of the racism that is built into that horror trope itself, which is something interesting to think of. And yeah, Mongrel folk are in Curse of Strahd, and there are two Mongrel Men characters in the latest Pathfinder game that just came out. So they are kind of front and center in fantasy media, and 5th edition has not really talked about them beyond Curse of Strahd, and they're a little bit different in Pathfinder, but there's still kind of that image of you know, that image that's not so great. And particularly the name, like the name just still being
even
Mongrel,
the name
Mongrel
alone is like bad enough. Like, it should stop there.
Do not pass go. Do not
like,
collect
it should have stopped
$100
before the name, like, let alone anything else.
Putting folk at the end of a slur does not make it okay. Like, pick any other slur, any other racial slur throughout history, put folk at the end, and then put it in a book. What was the most egregious thing for me is that when they did Revamped, and they did the edits to the Vistani to try to make it more respectful to the Romani people, and I think they still failed, but whatever. They were still there.
Yeah, unchanged, right?
And I go in, naive me, you know, with my newly minted Twitter account, and they start announcing it, and I tweeted, "Are you going to remove the Mongrel Folk? Because I would prefer to have this racial slur removed from the book." And the dog pile that ensued, I have never had my Twitter explode like that, of people just calling me whiny, calling me a baby, saying it's not about that, saying it's a term for dogs, it's not about you. That doesn't make it better. even the occasion, I take the person for their word. I have no idea if this person is actually mixed. But there's one mixed person on Twitter or someone claiming to be saying, oh, I don't think it's offensive. And like, that's part of like that right there is what instigated me making the video, is because after I got dogpiled, I realized people don't even know this is a thing.
No.
Mm-hmm.
And
You
after
really
I made
don't.
the video, if you look at the comment section of the video, so many people are like, I didn't know this was a thing.
I have a question. Do you guys think the mongrel folk can be rehabilitated? Like if they gave them a different name and then took apart the lore and tried to piece it together, giving them some sort of story more akin to the Genasi, which is what D&D has slowly been trying to do with a lot of their races. They've taken the Mongrel Men, and I think the new description for the Mongrel Folk tries to paint them as like survivors that band together, and they have a strong culture. Like, do you think there is the possibility for rehabilitation for the group of
I have an
Unfortunately,
idea.
it would-
I have an idea
Oh.
on that, actually, because I've been pondering this for a long time,
Mm.
and it's leaning into a different trope in horror, and the concept is the Moravian, taking the idea of the island of Dr. Moreau, where you have patchwork animals put together and then what do they call it, enhanced to have humanesque intelligence. Okay, so what you're starting from is, oh, I have a dog and a crab and a bird, and I'm mixing them all together as in a Frankenstein style, and creating and then enhancing it so that it creates an intelligent creature after the fact. So it's going into more of the Frankenstein island of Dr. Moreau. You call them Moravians because Moreau is actually public domain at this point, so there's no licensing necessary. Is the kind of stuff I think about. And there you have this sort of concept of the amalgamated creature who is created from nothing in magic. Okay, so it's not intelligent species that interbreed. It's not even a mixture of intelligent species. Okay, throw that aside, toss it, okay, and try to veer that way. I think that might be a way to have that sort of body horror element, to have that sort of gothic horror element, and discard the racial undertones of it. But again, that's just me brainstorming.
So long as they are like intelligent beings first and foremost, as long as they are people first and foremost, there will always be the uncomfortable connotation, even if they lean more into the animal thing, which they have done. There's still, because of the language used around mixed race people, and just I think in general, still it would hearken to a sort of horrible depiction of an idea of mixed raceness in people.
Yeah, it's a very tricky one that
It
I like your idea, but again, like people can still make those parallels between, even if it just starts off as an animal. Like again, people view mixed race people as mutts and mongrels, aka something that's not human, something that's more of an animal. So people will still make those unfortunate comparisons, and I do like that idea, and I see the horror tropes and the origins for it. But again, it's like, how are people going to take this? Which once it's out there in the world, it's kind of out of the author's hands. But like,
that's fair.
It's an incredibly tricky thing to tackle, because I understand people want to explore like that body horror, the Frankenstein sort of thing. But again, like a lot of these horror tropes are rooted in deeply, deeply problematic things that maybe sometimes you can cut out the rot. Maybe sometimes you can. Other times it is going to be a hell of a thing to actually do, like, the amount of work and like surgical precision to actually cut that shit out and what you need to do. So it's very tricky. It's very tricky.
Yeah, because like at the core, there's the idea that blending creates monstrosity, which is sort of, well, definitely was one of the fears that led to like the anti-miscegenation laws.
Yeah.
That's true.
And even that concept, like, first of all, miscegenation is a loaded term. Like, it's not just a, objective term to use for mixed race. I've had to cover this in my classes before. Like, it was a loaded term from the beginning, and it specifically spawned around the anti-miscegenation laws, which made it illegal to be like in a mixed race relationship, or made it real hard to be a mixed race person. And at that core is that fear that blending to things that are considered to be separate and different leads to something that's not quite right.
Mm.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, it's tricky. Like, can you do something that is blended and monstrous without running into all of that harm for mixed race people?
And then on top of that, you still have that the D&D like mechanization layer of like there has to be a stat block, there has to be a description, and it's inevitably very easy to end up using kinds of language and stat blocks that evoke those sorts of things in an uncomfortable way.
Yeah, I like your idea, Kimchi. I can't really see it being done in 5th edition. Maybe the next edition of D&D. I mean, Pathfinder 2nd edition has offered some new nuanced playable races, so I can see that, or ancestries as they call them. So I can see, you know, sensitivity readers going over something like that, and maybe cultivating a new form of they'll probably change the name first off. They'll definitely change the name. But yeah, I think you would think they
didn't. They've had like 4 or 5 different opportunities to do.
That's true.
They've had an opportunity to do it in 5th edition, and they still didn't do it.
Yeah. I think also with the Mongrel Folk, the thing that struck me was the fact that I hadn't heard of it, because for all the discourse around the issues D&D has with racial representation and racism, I somehow had never ever seen any discourse around the Mongrel Folk.
They're hidden in a module that is a very popular module. But
that's the thing. I have so many friends who play Curse of Strahd. They're
hidden in the back of the module in a town that not all players will or
to.
DMs will visit.
Yeah,
so that's
but you think that maybe people would at least discuss the issues with it, or you know, because I haven't played Curse of Strahd. Gothic horror isn't like really my thing, so I just immediately was kind of like, and then I heard about the Vistani and I was like, oh, more of a reason to be like, and then, but even with I saw the discourse around the Vistani without having played Curse of Strahd, but I had never seen discourse around the Mongrel Folk.
Yeah, and I think it stems from just like, because I also did, because for me, like, I actually played all through Curse of Strahd, and I actually happened to be MIA the day that we were going to that abbey where we could have encountered the Mongrel Folk. Now, I don't know if my DM put them in there, because when we went back, we just booked it to the abbot immediately and we didn't talk to anybody. But thank God I wasn't there if they included. I don't think that they did. But I think what the thing is, it's just, again, it's one of those things that just people don't really seem to know, because I decided like, hey, I wonder if people actually have talked about Mongrel Folk in terms of like the racist depiction. And I just typed in Mongrel Folk into the Twitter search, and the people that were talking about it only seemed to touch upon the horribly ableist side of the Mongrel Folk. They did not talk about, you know, how horribly racist this is towards mixed folks. And it could be just because like they are not mixed themselves, so they don't have the visceral reaction that we have towards that word. Like I told my sister about this, and the second that I said Mongrel Folk, she just straightened and her eyes widened, because we know what that word means for us. They just, it's like, you know, oftentimes, especially like in the case of Kimchi, he talked about like, this is a bad word that you should not be using. Don't use it. And people are like, oh, it's not that big of a deal. It comes in with that also like thing that happens a lot to mixed race people, that we are often told that we need to be quiet because we don't qualify enough as any sort of group. Our opinion is invalid and you need to take several seats. And so like oftentimes when we have like these feelings, like for me, I actually at some point started calling myself a mutt to either beat my relatives to the punch, or I was told like, I don't like being called that, but everybody around me told me, like, it's just a joke. It doesn't mean that much. So I just started internalizing, like, maybe I am overreacting, but it comes with the whole, like, this cacophony of people telling us our opinion doesn't matter, rooted in who we are. And we need to be quiet because we don't have enough of that in us to have an opinion or to have that opinion considered.
I think, I've definitely been through like all of that as well, and especially with the sort of internalizing it and turning it into a joke before other people can, which teenagers are you fool. But yeah, it's interesting because like obviously being mixed race, it does inherently give you a different experience in some ways than other people from any side of your heritage, but that doesn't invalidate the fact that you are from all those sides of your heritage. And I think the thing I've come to realize, like personally for me, and I'm not saying that this should be or is like the way for all mixed race people, but the way I've come to sort of terms with it for myself was that being mixed race is in and of itself an identity that is unique. So I can identify with everyone on this panel who none of you have the same mixture as me, but we all have unique shared experiences from being mixed race. But then within that, everyone has separate parts of like different experiences dependent upon like what different ethnic backgrounds and stuff that they have. And that is like, yeah, it is like a unique experience in and of itself. And I think that was one of the reasons why I wanted to get this panel together, because I think it is something that isn't discussed a lot. We are sometimes shouted down for it. And you know, there are issues with things like
hats off to you for doing this, just because, you know, being on a panel of all, you know, mixed people, it's very I don't know, it feels very good, because you guys you know, you guys get it, like you guys understand. And even though we're from different countries and had different experiences growing up, that shared you know, that shared lived experience of just being mixed, it is very very important, I think, and very underrepresented and very difficult to get right in genre fiction, to the point where, like you said, it's not just, you know, white creators who are screwing up, it's also POC creators. It's just difficult to communicate this experience. And yeah, I think it's important that you set this panel up, and I think it's important. I'm very happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, well, I'm very glad that all of you wanted to be part of it, because I was very excited by getting this group of people.
I was super excited when I was allowed to be a part of this panel, because I think, like, we've talked about this in our chat. This might be like the first time for a lot of us that we were able to talk about these issues that we've kind of been holding within ourselves in an open space, and have our feelings validated and say, yes, I know what that feels like. Again, like, we come from vastly different cultures that make the rich tapestry that is each individual on this panel. And yet, despite all of that, we still have these very, very, very common like threads that we find throughout us. And finally being able to talk to somebody about this, that isn't just my sister, that isn't just my dad, that isn't me explaining to a friend, like, yeah, this is what happens, me as a mixed race person, and having them to go, oh, that happens, but having people understand and understand the nuance and, like, you know, kind of like why this happens. It's incredibly cathartic and incredibly relieving. So I'm so glad that this panel got to happen.
Yeah, and I think go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, I think it's very telling that I'm like drawn to other mixed race people in a lot of ways, like that, like, it's so cool, like we have some things in common. And so it's really telling that representations of mixed race people don't have that same effect on me. I have never wanted to play one of the mixed races in D&D. Granted, I've only made 3 characters in my life. They've all been like,
that's enough. That's
enough.
Then they've all been from like the animal, like
Well,
I mean, like, so like I'm a rabbit folk in my current one, because I looked at the half orc, half elf, and went
me looking at my D&D Beyond character section and sweating at how many characters I haven't even played are in.
Should be working making characters.
Sorry, Kimchi, you had something you wanted to say, and then I think we can head towards wrapping this up.
To what you said, Emma, like, I collect, it's a weird way to say it, I collect mixed race celebrities. Like,
I do that.
Keanu's in a thing. Keanu Reeves is in a thing.
It's like,
you know.
Yes, that actually.
A lot of times you see
I wanted
them.
to do to wrap up. Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, a lot of times you see them, you see people or you see celebrities, and then like your mixed race sense goes off. You're like, oh, I wonder, and I look someone up, and I'm like, oh, there you go.
Your radar goes off, and you're like,
yeah, too.
The Metal Gear Solid exclamation mark pops up over your head, and you just do a Google search.
To wrap up, because this chat did get very heavy, which we all anticipated was going to happen and was inevitable, so that's fine. But we were sort of having some like positive affirmations there, and one thing I did want to do to wrap up was share something a bit more positive at the end, because I knew it would get pretty heavy, and Kimchi already sort of like managed to accidentally touch on it, which was I just thought it would be nice for if anyone does have like a mixed race character or a series that portrays something along those lines, or even a celebrity or something that you've looked up to, that you view positively, something like to share that and sort of like why you were drawn to it. I thought might be a nice way to wrap things up. And since Kimchi, you'd already started on it, I'll let you keep going.
Well, like Keanu Reeves, first thing that pops up. What was funny about that is like I go on this litany of like Naomi Campbell, Keanu Reeves, Tiger Woods, and I just start this litany of mixed race celebrities and stuff like that. And I've actually discussed this with my friends, and they were just like, "Oh, I never knew that they were mixed. I guess I don't think about that." I do.
Yeah.
Do you know who I am? Of course I do.
So
I just choked on some water because
it's fine. I did that earlier and I had to mask my
and there's some of the obvious ones like Emma Stone. Wait, no, not that one.
Oh my god!
I'm gonna flip my table.
But it's just throughout history, literary, Alexandre Dumas or
Dumas is a great one.
When I saw a picture of him, and I was just like, wait a second, there's more to this. And you start Googling, you're just like, oh.
Look him up. For people who don't know, look up the guy who wrote Three Musketeers. Look up his picture and then read his life history. It's incredible.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And I have a complicated history with Miss Saigon because of that. Because at one point, it's just like, it's so problematic in so many different ways. On the other side, when I was, 8 years old, that was the only mixed Asian person I have ever seen in anything at that point. And it was bad. but to give positive examples, I always fall back to Keanu Reeves because everybody seems to love Keanu Reeves. And like everything he like touches is, for me, just like I love action movies, so him in The Matrix or John Wick and stuff like that, just being cool and being Keanu, and yet
him
being
and always be my maybe. Oh my god,
yeah, stole the entire movie in 2 scenes. I love it.
And the fact that he's like apparently a really cool person in real life. I've just always looked up to that.
Cool. Let's just go around. Jeremy, do you have anything you'd like to share?
Yeah. So I am absolutely sick to death of DMing D&D 5th edition. I've like run so many campaigns and pumped through so many hardbacks that I'm pretty much done, except for shout out to Daniel Kwan and everybody else on Asians Represented who worked on Candlekeep Mysteries. I will run Candlekeep Mysteries for my girlfriend and her friend, but that's kind of a different, very intimate, 3 people game, so that's awesome. A little different, but otherwise I am basically done with DMing D&D 5e, and I finally DM'd enough that some of my players have finally been like, okay, we're going to start running games now, which is great to see. So I'm actually getting to sit back and make some characters at this point, and experiment with other games, which is fun. And I made my first Genasi character for a Ghosts of Saltmarsh game, which I run that module, but I'm excited to see how one of my players switches it up and runs it. So a Genasi character, I named her Akoro after Akoro Kamui, the Japanese octopus thing. And I'm interested in getting into her backstory and how she was born, of the sea. I think one of the origins of Genasi is that they can be born when there's like a catastrophic event as well, and basically the elemental planes open up, and some people are infused with air elemental energy, water elemental energy, and so that's how she got her water elemental origins. And I'm excited with delving into her backstory and how she's lived a life of piracy and is now settling down as an adventurer in this town to try to move away from her pirate life, but also to figure out who she is. And I wrote in this thing in her backstory how she had a difficult romance that she's kind of escaping from, one of the pirates she was involved in, and how that might end up catching up with her in the campaign is something I'm interested to see. So it's going to be fun for me, and I hope to delve into these tropes. And
I love everything about this character already.
Interestingly enough, like we had our internal chat discussion about why Genasi feel like mixed race people. And that made me realize, why was I attracted to Genasi? because I was looking through the races and I was like, none of that. I want to be a Warforged, but it doesn't really work for this campaign. Like, what can I be? And I was like, oh, I'll be a Genasi. I don't know why, but something about them resonates with me. And then I dove in, made the character, and then the next day we had our talk about why Genasi are very emblematic of the mixed race experience. And I was like, oh, now I know how I'm going to play her.
Yeah, you know what, because we had so many topics to cover and we didn't get to all of them, one of the topics I did want to touch on, we won't do it now, but was like expressing and exploring your own mixed race heritage through, or identity through, characters in both D&D and other TTRPGs. And I would love to do a follow-up panel where we can touch on that topic more in more detail, because I think there's a lot to explore there.
Yeah, hopefully I'll have played a couple sessions of this character by that point, and I can actually talk about it, because that's how I plan to evoke her presence at the game.
I like this idea.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thanks, Daniel.
Can I propose something?
Yes.
What if we did a stream where we made characters, or not we, you folks made characters? I would also, because I like symmetry, I would also love to bring in an additional guest, because there's 5 of you. I would love to bring in a 6th guest, also to bring in a fresh perspective to the conversation as well.
Love it.
But yeah, let's do another one, another 2,
let's
3.
go again.
Series. I will say. Oh, series. I will say this: if any of you, because I know, like Kimchi, we talked about doing like solo TTRPG stuff like a while ago. If any of you want to host something on Asians Represent, or have a topic or anything like that, like by all means. I mean, I guess I want to say, like, the door is open as long as we can like schedule everything. So let me know, and I'll make sure that I put you all in the podcast guest private channel on the Discord as well.
Awesome. Oh yeah. Well, yeah, with that knowledge that we are potentially going to get to explore that very interesting topic in another panel, because I also have a myriad of Genasi characters. But also, like exploring your identity through D&D is like part and parcel with it. So I think for this group of people, that would be a very interesting topic to discuss. So definitely love to do a follow-up on that. But let's just continue going around with this little wrap-up thing. And Sonia, I'd love to hear from you next.
So let me think. So like Kimchi, I don't really focus on mixed race characters, because one, they're so hard to find in terms of like good representation and the nuance that it needs. So I also fixate on not fixate, that's the wrong word for it, but I do that's a bad word to say, but I do hype up, I felt like mixed race celebs. So like, especially if they're Filipino like me, so like catch me running around the house every time Bruno Mars drops a new single, like, Mom! Or like when her won all her Grammys and stuff, and then proceeded to make like a cute little TikTok about what she was like showing her aunties her Grammys, or like Dave Bautista. I'm like, that's my wrestle dad. Or because I have to, because Daniel is here, I have to bring up my boy Louis Tan. He's mixed.
Louis Tan.
That's my boyfriend.
I'm not gonna lie. I'm like taking notes here, but I also have I'm just looking at pictures of Louis Tan. I'm taking diligent notes.
Also, y'all know I love Louis Tan. Healthy mixed race family in Mortal Kombat. Like I enjoyed seeing that. Yeah. That helped get rid of a lot of the other problems I have with that movie. So.
But also like Louis Tan is an NPC in one of my games, so that's a fun thing. But yeah, so I focus on mixed race celebrities, like Haley Steinfeld, who is Black, Jewish, Filipino, which is the closest I will ever get to having like a celebrity kind of like match with me, because again, like a lot of the narratives written by people don't have the nuance. So I focus on the success of my fellow mixed race people out in the real world. And in terms of like another like bit of a positive mixed race rep, I actually realized this, and it like sometime last week, but I was listening to In the Heights, or what In Heights clips came on when I was on YouTube. And there's a moment in the song Carnaval del Barrio where Carla sings and she starts talking about where she's from. And the lyrics are, my mom is Dominican Cuban, my dad is from Chile and PR, which means I'm Chile, Dominican, Rican, but I always say I'm from Queens. And in the original Broadway, it's kind of played like Carla's like an airhead, and she's like, oh, I am so many things, this is too complicated, fuck it, I'm just gonna say I'm from Queens. But the way Stephanie Beatrice plays it in the new movie, she plays like, I am all these things. I am proud of my heritage, but I'm also proud of the neighborhood that I'm from. I am all these things, and it's awesome. And I thought that was actually a really great way to like change it and whatnot.
Well, the only
Yeah.
lines I remember from the movie, so that goes to show you how,
Yeah,
how
it
important
sticks.
that was when I heard it.
Yeah, because when I heard it again, I would like fully did like the what? Play it again. But, yeah.
That's really cool. Emma.
Yeah, I've thought about this multiple times, probably since like the second or third episode of the L5R read through, when we tried to talk about representations, celebrities, or characters that we resonate with, and I'm like, resonate to me means something very specific. So I can think of like positive examples of mixed race people and characters, but I can't necessarily say I resonate with any of them. But I remember David Usher was a big one. He's a musician from the Canadian band Moist.
Word.
But yeah, Jeremy, you said too that you often gravitated toward musicians and and artists and other things. But David Usher was an early one where I'm like, that's a mixed race person. Later, it was Takeshi Kaneshiro.
Takeshi Kaneshiro, yeah.
I was like, oh, interesting. Yeah, like I was like really jazzed about that. But he doesn't necessarily play like mixed race characters. I remember being very disappointed when I found out that Spinelli from Recess was not mixed.
Wait,
I just assumed she was.
I assumed too. I was like, that's cool. That makes sense to me. But then they're like, she's Italian American. I'm like, and
That's like not all. I know better.
Yeah.
That's like me fully thinking that Terry McGinnis was like half Asian for my entire life.
I hold up. He's not half Asian?
I think he is.
What?
He's not. His parents are his parents are depicted as white, but he's supposed to be like Bruce Wayne's son. So who knows? You know. Yeah, but the thing is, I've always seen Terry McGinnis as half Asian.
Same.
Yeah.
Same with Superman. I always saw that as well. Asian.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then
I have a whole thing about Superman and how it's literally an immigrant story and how
in
depictions he should be a person of color.
Yeah.
But that may be a time for another panel.
There could be, Superman panel.
Can I?
But the last thing I wanted to bring up is something that I noticed recently was from Never Have I Ever. There's a mixed Japanese character, the Paxton Yoshida Hall or Hall Yoshida. And I like that he's just a person that happens to be mixed, but is also played by a mixed actor. And one line from that show, like, I don't know if anyone would have noticed it other than a mixed person, but when the main character hears him speaking Japanese to a family member, she's like, you speak Japanese? He's like, yeah. Like, I was speaking to my grandparent, like, my name's Yoshida Hall. And she said under her breath, oh, that's where the Yoshida comes from. I was like, I felt that in my bones.
Yeah.
Like, oh, that's where that comes from. It's like, But yeah, I don't know. Yeah. It's one of those things that still working on.
I really like that show. And I was also like pretty excited when I realized like, oh, that's a mixed race character. And they actually like showed that, like they had the episode where they have to do like a history project and he talks about like internment camps and how his family is Japanese and stuff. So obviously it's coming from like that side of things, but like it was cool to see him like get to express that and explore that in the show, I thought.
And he's kind of like the all-American football
he's the desirable man.
Yeah.
And he's Asian,
super interesting.
Race.
Yeah. But I'm not an all-American football guy, so straight up resonate.
I also love how he's another one on my little list of the sort of like Asian himbo trope that's starting to emerge to combat the Asian nerd trope. Yeah. Like him as well. I forgot about him when we did our costume episode when we mentioned that.
I love the Asian himbo trope, but I also started to notice a pattern with it. Another topic because just very quickly, but have you noticed that most of the Asian himbo tropes, they are Filipino?
Really?
Oh yeah.
Manny Jacinto is Jason Mendoza, the guy from what is it? Crazy Ex-Girlfriend.
Yeah, Josh Chan.
This is the only one that I probably will know. There's a character named Texas in Motor City. He is the biggest himbo ever, and he is Filipino, and I'm just like, well, okay, I like the Asian himbo trope, but why are they all Filipino? Anyway,
that's interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, so yeah, some of my examples are so like when I was younger, and you know, still now, because I love my trash TV. I was very into America's Next Top Model. Don't judge me. I know it's trash, but it's my trash. And,
yeah, no judgment.
And there are so many problems with that show in terms of depiction of race and stuff like that. But it was like when I was a teenager, it was a source of like seeing mixed race women being appreciated as beautiful, which was quite meaningful. Like seeing contestants like Naima Mora and Faux Porter was like very meaningful for me when I was young and in my awkward teenage stage where I looked very weird. And it was just, yeah, seeing these women being like celebrated for beauty. And obviously there are issues with that, but it was still like important to me. And then like now I think of characters like Aya from Assassin's Creed Origins, and there are a lot of Assassin's Creed characters that are mixed race. It's one of the reasons I like the series. Again, sometimes there are problems with it in the depictions, but Aya is pretty much just like, she's just a person who happens to be mixed race rather than them trying to explore any kind of like tragic mulatto kind of trope with it. And she's also like crucially a similar-ish mixture to me. She's like Greek and like Arab Egyptian, but then that kind of ties into my whole thing of being like Arab and Moroccan and Spanish, like Mediterranean. So there's like a similarity there. That's like one of the closest I'm ever going to get. And the other is Abed from Community. Again, it's like one of the closest I'm ever going to get sort of thing, him being like Arab and Polish. And then a comic series I really love, which we just found out is coming back in 2022,
Saga.
is Saga, which is really cool because they kind of like, they do have the thing of like the characters are aliens. Like the two main characters are two different species of aliens, and their daughter is the like narrator of the series, who is a mixed race character. But they are also, so Ilana and Marco, her parents, are also depicted as literally like, in terms of the like humanish sides of them as aliens, they are like both people of color. Ilana being South Asian and Marco, I think, being like East Asian. And so Hazel is both mixed race in the sense of being from two different alien species, but also her parents have the, you know, coding and appearance of two different kinds of people of color. So she's mixed race in both those senses, which I think is like an interesting thing to explore in the sci-fi genre, where typically you have the half-human hybrid or alien mixture being the only way in which a character is mixed race, and then they're white, in terms of like, you know, a Vulcan is played by a human, so obviously like they have to be a person, and that's usually a white person. But Hazel, the daughter, is like mixed race in both those senses, which I think is really interesting. And it's also just such a cool series. So yeah, I'm really glad we got to share some little like positive examples at the end there. And this has been such a fun panel, and I'm so glad we did this, and I'm also really looking forward to potential follow-up panels. And thank you all so much for being here, and thank you, Daniel, for running tech and giving us the space to do this on Asians Represent. But before we go, obviously, I would love to have everyone go around and say where we can find you on the internet. Plug yourselves a little bit, because you're all awesome and you deserve to have your stuff seen.
Oh, starting with me? Or
oh yeah, sorry.
Okay,
yeah,
let's go in the
time.
order of the overlay. So we'll go Emma, Sonia, Jeremy, Kimchi,
Okay.
and then Iza.
Okay.
All right. So, yeah, my name is Emma Yasui. You can find me on Twitter at Starchiologist. So starch and archaeologist jammed together. I don't do a whole lot there, but you know, whatever. And otherwise, I am on the Asian Represent Discord. I'm one of the moderators. You can also catch me on episodes all over the place. I've been on quite a few. Ongoing is the Asians Read Caratur. And yeah, I have done a few cultural consultation and sensitivity reads, and I'm open to doing more, with the caveat that I do focus on Japanese history and culture, as well as diaspora experience and tropes. And you want someone to tell you the history of a certain representation of Japanese people and culture. I gotcha. But yeah, that's me.
Yes, I am next. Hi, everybody. I'm Sonia. You can find me across all social media at Sony Baloney Art. I'm most active on Twitter, where you can find me just mixture of TTRPG talk, art, if I am able to post it, and released from NDA prison. Yeah, so I'm part of the Unbreakable Anthology team. I'm hopefully Bon Appetit, the Quest RPG venture is going to come out soon. As of this recording, the Baby Bestiary 2022 calendar is still going on Kickstarter. So if you want a cute calendar with cute baby fictional creatures, get you a calendar for the holidays and the new year. But yeah, this was a great panel and I had a wonderful time talking about it. This is my first time talking on an Asians Represent panel and first time talking about these issues. So I hope that we can actually do a follow-up one where we talk about our characters and how we play through that stuff.
Yeah, you can find me online at Pixelgrotto. That's where most of my gaming related writing is located. You can find my blog there where I talk about whatever I have time to talk about. Most recently is why I thought Resident Evil Village was okay, not great. And you can find my more professional TTRPG writing, mostly at D&D Beyond at this point, where I'm talking about the current books and the upcoming books. And I've got articles down the pipeline. And yeah, that's it, basically.
All right. You can find me pretty easy. I make video essays at youtube.com/legalkimchi. You can also find me on Twitch every Tuesday and Saturday night at 9:30 Central Time, where I have somebody from the TTRPG community come on and we talk about various topics surrounding our community there. You can find me on Twitter at legalkimchi. Or just at Legal Kimchi. Additionally, and I forgot to mention this earlier, I also do sensitivity consultation specifically for mixed race representation. I'm working on, and I'm allowed to say this, I'm working on an Elf and an Orc Have Little Babies revised edition and sequel right now. So hopefully they listen to me. But so you can find me on all of those things. And if you're interested in more about what I have to say about this, I did create a video essay specifically on being mixed race and mixed race representation in TTRPGs. And you can find that on my YouTube.
Cool. And yeah, I'm Izza, aka Evil Clever Dog, aka Daniel Kwan's favorite Twitter handle. I am a designer for performance, cosplayer, TTRPG streamer, content creator. You can find me at Evil Clever Dog on Twitter and Instagram and also YouTube, where I make like cosplay and crafting videos. I recently released one, the first part in like a multi-video series of me making Ares from the game Hades. And so yeah, go check that out if you want to. And I also stream TTRPGs on Monday nights on Chromatic Chimera. I'm part of No Initiative streaming Quest, the Soaring City. Big up Quest. Hell yeah, I love Quest. And yeah, we've been on like hiatus for a while, but we have new episodes coming out soon, I promise. And yeah, I have other streaming stuff coming up, but I don't think I can talk about that yet. But yeah, go find me on Twitter if you want to see more about that in the future, and go check out my YouTube channel. And you can also find me here on Asians Represent, but who knows when Critical Read Al-Qadim will be coming back.
That just means we're gonna have to do other things.
Yes, definitely. And hopefully another one of these soon.
Yeah,
100%. Let's do it.
So yeah, thank you everyone so much for being on this panel, and thank you Daniel, and I'm just so happy that we got to do this. I'm like over the moon, really. And
my people.
Everyone had like fantastic insights, and that's the thing I love about these is like everyone comes here with their own knowledge to share, but then we all learn something from each other. That's why I love doing these Asian Represents panels so much. Like, anyway, I'm rambling again now. Thank you everyone so much for watching. Goodbye.
Bye.
And we're back. Here we are. Yo, that was that was great. That was
a
awesome.
lot. I loved it.
It was a lot.
Yeah.
And yeah, wow, great. I'm really excited for part 2. We're gonna work that in. We have 2 more episodes of Asians Represent left in this season. One is a topic that like we have one slot is like kind of up in the air. And then another is, I guess the season finale is a wuxia episode where Agatha is taking the lead, hosting that. I'm super hyped. Yeah.
I'm really hyped too. Yeah.
So I wonder if for the first episode of November, we do like the follow-up to this one. Or we do like a special stream where, the folks do some character creation and talk about, or we just do the Genasi panel. Could be very interesting. If we do the Genasi panel, I also want to make sure that we bring in other folks whose cultural backgrounds, and the Genasi is very, very rooted in specific cultures. So I would like to also discuss that in the same panel. So hopefully we could do the Genasi panel as a follow-up. I have confirmation from everyone who was already on the stream that they want to do a follow-up. So it's going to be the same folks, plus one more. I think Izza in chat right now has just said, I will do it, which I assumed that Izza was going to host because Izza was such a fantastic host alongside everyone else. I noted this, after we stopped recording, when we did our pre-recording, that I really like how both Emma and Kimchi kind of bookended the sort of like, where can we find you on the internet, by talking about the kinds of the consulting that they do. And a big thing there, and I mentioned this to them personally, was that I think it's really important that when we say, hey, we're cultural consultants or we do sensitivity readings, these are the things that we want to do work on. These are the things that we specialize in. Because as we've talked about so many times on the show, there have been instances when folks have just assumed that we could do Korean stuff or we could do this Japanese stuff. So I really like that both Kimchi and Emma brought that up. And they were unintentionally first and last of the guests, and then with Izza being the final one. But yeah, I thought that was fantastic, and it's kind of getting to the point where we bring out Marla because it's time to shout out our amazing patrons.
And she loves it every time.
Oh, Marla loves this because this is the time when the green screen also like shifts a little as Marla comes out. But yeah, I wanted to really, thank everyone who, joined into this conversation and, participated in the chat. I saw a lot of really fantastic stuff there. I think one of the things that nobody else will get to see is just the chats that happen to prepare for this. I started like a Discord group chat with everyone, and I look away for like 3 hours and it's just like messages, and it was just so awesome seeing everything. I could barely keep up, but these were like really interesting conversations that were taking place, and it was just a very clear indicator that this was the kind of conversation that needed to happen, but also really sad that this had never happened before. So I'm super grateful of that. And we are also super grateful for our patrons who have allowed us to do this. Upgrade Asians Represent allow us to, fulfill our mission or try to further, strive towards our goal of wider Asian representation, and the mixed race conversation is very much an important part of that. And I'm glad we were able to do that. So thank you to all the folks who are on screen, the day one patrons, those who have, just joined on Patreon. Special shout out to our guardians, Brooke Bright, Pixelgrotto, Jeremy. Shout out to Jeremy, my favorite D&D Beyond writer. I'll say it. Yeah. I'll say it. And Daisy May. And then, of course, Marla's favorite. Oh, I got to make space for Marla to come in. Hold up. Audio listeners, I'm so sorry. Here we go. Marla's screaming. She's like, I don't want to be here. And for our most honorable patrons, right there, we'll go.
Oh,
Marla.
Yep.
Marla, say hi to everyone. Marla wants to say hi to all of you, especially the most honorable Ryan the Wizard Hall. Marla, can you say that? Oh, squeak. Metal Weave Games. Also, shout out to Metal Weave Games for Baby Bestiary 2022. The calendar, crushing it on Kickstarter. Sonia was, of course, the artist on that. So special shout out Metal Weave Games. Valorous Games, Liana. Shout out to you. Shout out to the most honorable Dungeon Glitch / Matt. And the most honorable 2 times Epic Impulse. Marla loves all of you. Marla, can you say bye to everyone? No? Marla? Oh, okay. She's okay. Don't. Oh, okay.
You can see the sense of betrayal in her eyes.
She's like, why do you do this to me on the first and third Friday of the month? The Asians Represent podcast. Yeah. That said, Marla's freaking out. She's like, I'm gonna pee. You good, Marla? She's good. All right, but that said, thank you everyone for joining us for this episode of Asians Represent. Here's to many more. Looking forward to it, and we'll catch all of you soon. Bye, everybody.